Next, CityNet 30 takes you downtown for the weekly luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. Live weekly coverage of City Club is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Paddy Tillett, President-elect of the club. Welcome to a City Club program that I think you'll find both informative and provocative. Today we focus on Portland's civic culture, past, present and future, with Carl Abbott, Professor of Urban Studies at Portland State University, an author many times over. Participating in the discussion with Carl are Adam Davis, partner with Davis and Hibbitts Inc., and Tad Savinar, local artist and planner. This program is part of a series this year honoring Portland's 150th anniversary and is co-sponsored by the Oregon Historical Society. Join us next Friday, the 11th of May, for an unusual program in an unusual setting. The topic will be Portland's soon-to-be public market, highlighting the planning, siting, and hard realities of making this longed-for project a reality. The program will be held in Pioneer Courthouse Square, and all reservations for this program must be made and paid for in advance. Seating's limited, so call the club office as soon as possible to reserve your place or make your reservations with Suzanne as you leave today. The cost for this special luncheon is $18 for members and $20 for non-members. Tap into the huge resources of the club via the City Club website. It offers access to research reports, past club program presentations, upcoming events, and member information. The answers are all to be found at www.pdxcityclub.org. Our board host today is Carol Witherell, Professor of Education at Lewis and Clark College. She'll ask the first question of our speakers. Following Carol's questions, we'll open the program to questions from City Club members in the audience. Be ready at the microphone with your question ahead of time, identify yourself as a member of the club, and keep your questions short and to the point, please, so that we can make the most of our panel's time. Broadcasts of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Kaiser Permanente Health System, Wells Fargo Bank, and Portland General Electric. We're very grateful for their support. Now I should like to introduce all three of today's speakers, Carl Abbott, Adam Davis, and Tad Savinar. Dr. Abbott is an accomplished historian with a penchant for urban policy and planning. He's widely published in the subject and has made Portland his laboratory for much of his work. I know that many of you are already familiar with his books, and if you're not, there's the latest publication on the table at the back there. One that I will make special mention of is the Metropolitan Frontier, Cities of the Modern American West. This received the Best Book Award from the Urban History Association. Carl is able to view our city today through a telescope from the past. This gives him an unusual and edifying perspective on Portland at its 150th anniversary. Adam Davis is partner with Davis and Hibbitts Inc., familiar to you through their surveys and focus group research. Adam's face-to-face interviews have taken him to every corner of the state, so he has an unusually Catholic view of citizen values and opinions on a host of different topics. He's chaired the Columbia-Willamette Features Forum and has the impeccable credential of having served on the Board of Governors at the City Club and on both the club's vision committees, for which we're very grateful. Tad Savinar, as artist, humorist, playwright, civic conscience, and bon vivant, is our Renaissance man on the panel. Tad was formerly trained in the visual arts, and he has pieces included in the permanent collections of both the Museum of Modern Art and at the archives of the Smithsonian Institution. All 6 of his published plays have been produced, and I particularly enjoyed Cover Shot, that pitted the substantial egos of a developer and an architect against one another. Tad was one of a team of public artists engaged in creation of our West Side light rail stations and other facilities, but he assumed a role that was much broader than artist. He demonstrated an extraordinary ability to problem solve at every level. For the past 10 years, Tad has been much in demand on major infrastructure projects around the country, doing just that, and imbuing his clients with a little culture along the way, no doubt. He's currently working in Phoenix on their new light rail system and has also worked in St. Louis, Salt Lake City, Seattle, and continues on a variety of civic and infrastructure projects here in Portland, I'm glad to say. So please welcome our panel to comment on Portland's civic culture, provincial, pragmatic, and progressive. Carl?
Well, before I get started, I would like to acknowledge the help of the Oregon Historical Society in putting this program together, and Mary Ann Keddington Lang of the Historical Society, who helped to organize it, and a slightly expanded version of my remarks today, which is drawn from the research for my new book, is also in the May issue, or the current issue of the Oregon Historical Quarterly. And I also would like, before I launch in, to since we're coming up on Mother's Day, to acknowledge that my mom is here, age 91, still going to League of Women Voters meetings and City Club meetings. So let's give her a round of applause. So Portland, Seattle, sure, Seattle's like Portland in some ways, but Indianapolis, Kansas City, Portland on paper has interesting peers. Take other metro areas with populations in the 1 to 3 million range, pick social and economic indicators such as ethnic mix and educational attainment, and find the places whose profile resembles Portland. Now, despite differences in style that we could all talk about at great length, Seattle is a close match. But more surprising statistical siblings are cities along the American Main Street of US 40 or Interstate 70, start on East Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, end on West Colfax in Denver. Along the way are places like Indianapolis and St. Louis and Kansas City. The Gen X spokesman of Monk magazine recently described Portland as coastal intelligence matched with Midwestern scale and pace. There is a certain Middle Westernness about Portland's moderate scale, slow tempo, informality, and self-satisfaction. Where Portland differs from its mid-American cousins, I think, is its optimistic conservatism, or its pragmatic progressivism. This is the insight that journalist Ernie Pyle reported back in 1936. Everybody here is crazy about Portland. They rave about it. They don't talk about their industries and their schools and their crops. They roar about what a wonderful place Portland is just to live in. Portland is a place, Pyle went on to say, where money doesn't get you anywhere socially. I asked, what does get you anywhere? They thought and they thought. They finally decided that the standard was merely an ability to contribute something, usually agreeableness and interest. Well, Portlanders are proud of themselves. Ask around. If you're a stranger in town, you ask around and you'll learn that Portland is special for its climate, which of course we all know is mild, not rainy, for its views of Mount Hood, for its small town ambiance, and its success at fending off urban congestion and sprawl. New Yorkers either love it or hate it. They hate it because there's no edge to anything here, or they love it because you can actually relax. In this self-satisfied picture of achievement by avoidance and healthy living, Los Angeles, we know, has long been damned. Seattle has sold its soul. Only Portland still treads the straight way of good planning. So Portlanders, I think, are pleased provincials. New York, to personify a contrast, blithely dismisses American rivals, measures itself against Paris and Tokyo, proclaims itself the champion of the world. Portland is satisfied with its place and its pace, its position in our economic and natural landscapes. It's a city, to quote a recent observer, whose tone is set by people who fully occupy themselves locally. I think it's instructive to look behind the quality of life ratings that first earned Portland favorable attention beginning in the 1970s. Number of rankings found Portland either the fourth most livable city, or in one study for the federal government, the most livable big city. 200-factor rating. And though nobody had yet used the term social capital, that's what was being measured. Educational levels, library circulation, parks, voter turnout, newspaper readership, similar factors. Well, Portland dropped during the recession of the 1980s. Portland dropped in the pack, especially in places like Places Rated Almanac and Money Magazine. Until recently, one of Portland's best placements in Money back in 1990 was 38th, but behind Tacoma and behind Richland. Now, not to put a knock on the Tri-Cities, but, give me a break. And Portland has continued its mixed reviews in the business press, good for entrepreneurship, less so for income. The work ethic is excellent, Fortune magazine said, even though many workers need occasional sprees among the trees. Now, Portland does have nationally admired institutions for citizen involvement and civic action because challenges familiar to many U.S. cities have interacted with a distinctive political culture. Not only do Portland pedestrians wait for green lights, writes Robert Kaplan, but the city has an atmosphere of a Scandinavian country where almost everybody shares a background in values and trusts the centralizing controlling force of local government to preserve these things. The result, when it works, has been a rare conjunction of public and private interest. Portlanders inhabit their region very self-consciously and deliberately, even if we're not unanimous in the goals that we seek. And I think, just for a quick historical excursion, you can compare Portland civic activism of the 1970s and 80s and 90s, and perhaps the current decade, to similar eras elsewhere. To Birmingham, England, in the 1860s and 1870s, at the time it was the best governed city in the world, when the values of nonconformist religion helped to shape city government as a servant of all the people. U.S. example is Chicago from the 1890s through the 1910s, when business interest and public interest converged around the physical redesign of the metropolis. Portland civic action compares, I think, to the locally activated reinvention of cities in recent years, such as Glasgow and Barcelona. But the civic moment is fragile. In the face of neoconservative national discourse that devalues the public realm, Portlanders must constantly tend and maintain their institutions for civic discourse and community action. Oregon is a place where strong individualism tempers and challenges strong communities. Few traditional institutions have intervened between citizens and self-interest. The state has very low church membership attendance, tied with Alaska for second to last behind unsanctified Nevada. Low church membership and pioneer, quote, pioneer individualism mean that Oregon shows up 2/3 of the way down a generosity index based on itemized deductions on federal income tax returns. Ethnic groups have limited political salience and cultural power, contrast to Boston's Irish or Atlanta's African Americans. Labor unions have historically been weak. The mediating role of these traditional institutions has to be filled by consciously created civic groups, neighborhood associations, friends of groups, friends of and fill in the blank, Association for Portland Progress, City Club, and balancing low levels of charitable giving, Oregon has more nonprofit 501c3 organizations per capita than most other states. Portland, in other words, is an intentional metropolitan community. The term intentional community implies both vision and fragility. Intentional communities range from co-housing projects to communes, from secular utopian settlements to separatist religious enclaves. They're motivated by a dream of doing things better, and they can quickly collapse when visions diverge. And there are some problems that face our civic culture. Portland, as do many other cities, faces the replacement of local business leadership by outside ownership. With banks and utilities and manufacturers controlled from San Francisco and Minneapolis and Scotland and Germany, will these corporate resources continue to be available for creative responses to community problems? Another worry is that the Portland style tends to muffle radically dissenting voices. If you work on the team in Portland, you get to be at the table. If you don't work on the team, your voice may not be heard. Maybe, advocates of Portland consensus would certainly disagree, but it's possible that this kind of co-optation stifles a serious hearing for good ideas by whittling away at genuine alternatives until they fit the mold. An example might be Portland's tradition of middle-class populism. Since the late 19th century, an economy of skilled workers and small businesses has nourished a dissenting political tradition that distrusts professional expertise and corporate leadership. Mayoral and city council elections in Portland show a divide between outer east side neighborhoods and the central and close-in neighborhoods most benefited by public policies. In socioeconomic terms, the divide pits anti-tax populists against quality-of-life liberals. At the metropolitan scale, a physically compact, institutionally integrated metropolis has left little elbow room for new social and economic interests. For example, the electronics industry in Oregon, despite its substantial economic clout, I don't think has much political clout. The industry has been frustrated by its inability to promote lateral highways to help get suburban workers to their jobs. It's the West Side Bypass story, rightly crossed off the list, I believe. Or to secure funding for a big engineering school in the western suburbs. If you look at the electronics industry agenda, it hasn't been very successful yet. And a third concern is the balance of reactive politics and moral politics. The Portland and Oregon style at its best is rational and morally grounded. Government by committee and consensus in the service of the commonweal. An ethic of process that stresses citizen participation and responsibility coexists with an ethic of product that stresses the value of a compact metropolis that sits lightly on the land. Portland's and Oregon's development history is filled with moral challenges. More than 60 years ago, Lewis Mumford asked Oregonians and Portlanders in the City Club, are you good enough? Not, are you skilled enough? Are you good enough? It's a moral challenge. Tom McCall, in the voice of an Old Testament prophet, told us that we needed not to regulate land for economic benefits, we needed to save the state from grasping wastrels. It's a moral voice that reverberates through policymaking in the city and state. Now, these sources and voices of dissent notwithstanding, I think more Portlanders are pragmatists than ideologues. They know they have something special in their metropolis. They hope to keep it that way. In 1999, 83% of the residents of the city of Portland rated their neighborhood livability good or very good, up from 79% in '94. An area-wide survey in the same year found that nearly 3 times as many residents think that Metro is doing a pretty good or excellent job than rated its performance as poor. At least for a while, I think Portland has solved the planning puzzle at the scale of the city. At the metropolitan scale, we have a more fragile consensus and a public that's divided pretty much down the middle in evaluating the growth of the 1990s. At the scale of ecoregions, we have a powerful but diffuse sense of place without agreement on right action. We know that the Columbia River and its tributaries sustain both economy and culture, but we debate their best use. The very word forest elicits deep allegiance, but to multiple ends. So what do we have? I think we have a provincial city whose residents are satisfied with the possibilities of this place. It's a pretty good province to be the capital of. It's a place that Portlanders value, their place in the region. It's a pragmatic city that takes politics seriously as a search for common ground rather than an opportunity to manifest ideologies. And it's a progressive city where we believe that it is still possible to think our way to a more just and prosperous community. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I've been asked to comment
on what Carl has shared with you based on having talked to a lot of Portlanders and residents in the Portland area over the last 25 years in focus groups and surveys. And based on what I've heard and what I've seen, I have to say that I see some hairline fractures in the bell, in this bell of civic exceptionalism, maybe is the way to put it. But at the same time, there's something holding this bell together that just amazes me. I've seen it over this 25 years. It's still there, but I have some questions as to how much longer that will be there as well. And we perhaps might be able to discuss that during the question and answer period. Let me tell you 3 quick stories as far as these hairline fractures are concerned. Put yourself in a focus group studio. You're standing behind this one-way mirror, and you're watching this discussion that I'm leading. We're about half an hour into the discussion. We have a good rapport going. We're talking about the future of the city of Portland. And boy, that's a topic that people get jazzed about, and they're really into it. I get to the point in the topic guide, and I ask the folks, listen, name for me some services provided to you by your local government. Silence. The silent probe. You know, I'm a moderator. I know these techniques. I'm supposed to be quiet and see if maybe on their own they can come up with something, but nothing. Blank stares. So I said, well, maybe they need some help. How about police? Oh, yes, police. Yes, police. Yeah, nodding of the head around the table. Fire. Yes, fire. Good. Any others? Any others? No, no. Moral of the story, everyone? Over the last 25 years, Tim and I and other public opinion pollsters in the city will tell you that we've been seeing an increased level of ignorance when it comes to what government is doing for all of us and how government works. So story number 1. Story number 2, the client that needed smelling salts. A couple of months ago, a client of ours was letting her fingers do the walking through some computer abstract of a survey that we completed for her of, listen to the specs, highly motivated registered voters. So she's going through it, she's nodding, and she comes to the question, the demographic section of the questionnaire, usually at the very end, that asks the respondent's age. And there, between the ages of 18 and 34, she sees 5%. She almost faints. She was expecting a figure 6 times that size. And indeed, had the survey been of the general public, she would have been somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 times. But friends, another thing that we're seeing is that though they make up about 25 to 30% of the population of registered voters, they've disappeared in terms of participation in those kinds of elections. It's bad enough in general elections. You should see what it is like in primary elections and special elections. It is incredible. Story number 3, the presentation that no one came to. We were just part of a public workshop that the public officials that we were involved in put a lot of time into, a lot of time organizing it, and a lot of time promoting it. Now, let me tell you a little about the attendance very quickly. The number of public officials outnumbered the number of members of the general public 5 to 1. 10 public officials showed up. You do the math. 2 folks showed up. And if that's any indication of our civic wellness, I would contend that we here in Portland are in trouble. But despite all this, I go back to what I was sharing with you at the very beginning. There's something that is holding Portland together. And it is unique to Portland. It cuts across, in my opinion, demographic, psychographic, and political groups. Carl has been with us for a long time, and it is since 1982 when I've had an opportunity to really start the study of organs, values, and beliefs, and continue that study to today. It keeps bubbling to the top as the primary value and belief that ties so many of us together, and it's this, concern for the environment. And it was interesting, if you listen very carefully to what Carl said, there is that theme throughout what he was saying. Concern for place, a concern for the environment. I'm still trying to understand the semantics of it and the imagery of it. It's not as simple as you think it is, concern for the environment. It's more than just being a member of Greenpeace or a member of the Sierra Club. For someone down in Southern Oregon, it might be meaning opening up that door, stepping out on the doorstep, and seeing a beautiful sunrise. That's how they define concern for the environment. To someone in Northwest Portland, it might be the threats to salmon habitat. It means different things to different people, but it is what binds us all together. My concern now, I can stand here this afternoon and tell you that I think this core value and threat is under siege like it's never been before. And there are two things that are coming at us, and we have to be very sensitive about them. One is an economic downturn, and second is the power crises. When you pit this particular core value and belief against those two things, you're talking about something historically that hasn't happened before in our area. That's the yellow light I think we have as a community. It'll be interesting to see how things play out. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Before I begin, and I'm going to be very brief, I wanted to tell you that in preparation for this event, I had an advance copy of Carl's book that I attempted to skim, which was impossible. And I set it aside and realized that I had to sit down and read it every page by page and every word by word. And so I'd encourage you, it's a plug, this is a blatant plug, that I was not put up to. It has a wonderful voice. It's full of language that just steps off the page and kind of extends its hand to you in a conversation that's really befitting of this place. So I'd encourage you all to take a look at that. I used to describe gridlock as the moment when four drivers in Portland reached an intersection at the same time and created a traffic jam because each one of them was too polite to proceed through the intersection. Like those old chipmunks, Chip and Dale, we were all engaged in this endless conversation of, after you, no, really, after you, no, you were here first. Funny as that may seem, I'm sure that every one of us in this room has recently experienced a more traditional form of gridlock. And by that I mean the seemingly endless, motionless wait in traffic. And rather than the chirpy voices of Chip and Dale, we can now actually bear witness to the occasional honking of the automobile horn. We all laugh, but we also know that this region is indeed changing. We are not only the witness to this change, we are the stewards of the change as well. We have built, governed, and legislated in an atmosphere of democratic common sense. And now we have become the poster child for livability. Unfortunately, we made the mistake of telling people. And now as new citizens enter our city, no one is providing them with a crash course in Miss Manners, Oregon style. Don't get me wrong, I'm in no way suggesting that we are being deluded by the influx. It is more that we are faced with rapid decisions concerning growth, concerning unforeseen impacts of changing technology, and the challenges of the 2.5 kids, dog, and minivan social model. I believe that Oregon, and more precisely Portland, is facing its greatest civic challenge at this very moment. I have no answers, but I do have some questions. Questions about our identity, questions about which aspects we should strive to preserve, and which aspects where we should persevere to form change. I pass on these questions to you that they may spark a dialogue for our luncheon discussion. We love our downtown, but how do we continue to build the downtown retail engine in a dynamic and vital way which enhances and protects the indigenous businesses, encourages new investments, yet does not promote an unbalanced out-of-town ownership or an every city parade of retail? As citizens who wish to shape our destiny and our landscape, how do we continue to promote big ideas and visionary thinking while at the same time not get bogged down in endless stakeholder meetings, focus groups, and neighborhood charrettes, which promote solutions as visionary as oatmeal? When are we ever going to put some real attention into solving the future identity of the close-in East Side and weave the city together once and for all? Regionally, how will we come to terms with the different cultures, land use patterns, voting blocks, and social sentiments of the inner Portland neighborhoods as opposed to the outer areas such as Washington County, Vancouver, or even as close in as Southeast 50th? How do we protect all that is civic, all that is quirky, and all that promotes the human scale without becoming so mired in ye oldiness that we fail to evolve into the next century with some modernist visions intact? And finally, since I'm up here and you're down there, I have a personal bone to pick. So often in our visions of Portland, we hear the description or the phrase world class thrown around in conjunction with our plans for the future. I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't wish the city to aspire to be world class at all. I wish the city to continue to be Portland class. To me, the notion that Portland would want to be anything other than Portland is very distasteful. And now I'd like to take this moment to show you all how easy it is to effect change. I'd like everyone in the room to raise their right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Your real name. This is on cable. They're all saying it. Do solemnly agree from this day forward to eliminate the phrase world class from all planning exercises, focus groups, and stakeholder meetings, and to replace it with the phrase Portland class. That is really the true question here today. How do we continue to plan and use every tool at our disposal to make the best choices for the future that will enhance and protect what we all love about this magnificent city?
I get to start the fun here. This is a civic justice question, and it's also a vision and fragility question. And it may even be a beyond pleased provincials question. It has been argued that in many ways, African Americans and Latino and Asian immigrants are Oregon's and Portland's 20th and now 21st century pioneers. They have strived to retain in these communities many of the values our mainstream culture seems to have forgotten. The value of education, folk and performing arts, strong family and religious ties, respect for elders, and concern for the challenges of the less fortunate. Yet, these values are often trumped for these communities by the effects of poverty, an unstable and underpaying job market, inadequate access to health care and quality education, and rising housing costs. Don't we ignore the conditions that nurture these communities, these voices, these values at great peril to our common civic culture? What challenges and opportunities, both, do you see here?
Go for it, Carl.
Okay.
Good question, Carol.
I was going to say yes until you followed up your... I think it's one of the things that's interesting about the kind of Portland's social landscape or ethnic landscape is the general kind of dispersal of populations, increasingly African American population, the dispersal of the Latino population throughout, fairly widely throughout the metropolitan area, the same with Asian American residents, so that rather than patterns of kind of intensely concentrated neighborhoods for particular groups, we have a pattern in which new groups with their ideas and values can leaven a lot of existing neighborhoods and communities. So I actually see, in many ways, often when sociologists talk about immigration and assimilation, they talk about the receiving culture or the immigrants learning from the culture that receives them. I think in Portland we may have an excellent opportunity for the receiving culture to be learning from the newcomers, in part because of this dispersal throughout the kind of fabric of the metropolis.
Let me just quickly comment on your question, Carol. We've got to keep, of course, one thing clear here, that as far as clout in the political arena, we're still looking at a very homogeneous community. And let's not kid ourselves that that has been partly responsible for us perhaps having the success we've had, is that we have had that homogeneity while a lot of other areas have struggled with the heterogeneous, a much more heterogeneous population than we have. I would second Carl that where, at least I see the action and a lot of hope, is at the neighborhood level, where when you move into the neighborhoods, this is where a lot of these ethnic minority groups can play a significant role in shaping not only their specific area, but neighboring areas as well. But I think for the foreseeable future, that is where we're going to see it, is at the neighborhood level and also in the outlying counties.
I think this has actually been a problem for a long time in Portland. I don't know that we have a solution. It may be that in our over-politeness as citizens and our kind of courteousness to each other, we have in some way disseminated that voice, that diverse voice, in a polite way, that we are not to be railed against as in other cities by diverse populations, and so there is a kind of just an acceptance of business as usual. And that may be an interesting way, or factor that's been kind of quashing that voice. My sense is that across the country, in general, there is a distrust of the government or organized governments by diverse communities in providing them access to a voice. And it seems to me that the most effective way to engage diverse populations is actually through industry, where people are hired, have jobs, and begin to ultimately empower themselves and feel a part of the cycle. The government voice to diverse audiences is always one of control. It's not necessary control in a sense from the government, whereas jobs are something that are self-empowering. And so I would turn the question actually to industry, to ask private industry what it is doing to reach out and engage diverse populations. Secondly, when I go to other communities and need to work with Native Americans or blacks, Hispanics, generally I go through the churches and the YWCAs because they are recognized, as you've said, Adam, that they are more based in the community. I'm not excusing the ability of government to do its job. I'm just saying that I don't think it's an effective tool in engaging people. You need to engage them either where they live or where they work. Or where they pray, to give them a sense, or where their youth are, to give them a sense of belonging.
Chris Smith, club member, and I want to ask a question about Carl's point that high tech has not had much political clout in our region. And I'll preface the question by saying that I'm a neighborhood and transportation activist here in Portland, while professionally employed for Xerox down in Wilsonville, and find very little connection between the two. But we saw in Silicon Valley in the 90s that high tech woke up, and mostly under the leadership of John Doerr, they were influential in presidential politics. They passed a number of initiatives in California, including some important educational issues. And Carl, you mentioned sort of the agenda of high tech perhaps in the past that was kind of out of step with the rest of the region. But I've seen recently that high tech was a participant in the coalition that helped defeat most of the Sizemore ballot measures in the last election cycle. This legislative session, Jim Johnson at Intel, Scott Gibson from Sequent, some other people have put together something called the New Economy Coalition that's trying to I think work within the realm of realpolitik and get an engineering school not in the western suburbs, but at OSU. The question is high tech waking up, and do you see a trend line there?
I think there are some promising changes, and what I see as the contrast is perhaps moving from a regional agenda, an agenda that focuses on kind of service needs in Washington County, to a metropolitan, a statewide agenda that looks at kind of the broader questions of supporting a strong economy through education, human services, and a much broader kind of approach to the questions of what does a company need to prosper. So I see some promise there, kind of a shift of the scale.
Thank you.
Erwin Mandel, City Club member. Just a suggestion for Tad before I get to my question. There's another phrase you might add to your list of things to be abjured, and that is 24-hour city. We need sleep. But for Adam Davis, if concern for the environment is the glue that holds Portlanders together, then how do you explain the proliferation of gas-guzzling, energy-hogging, polluting SUVs? Is this love of the environment merely lip service, or are we really concerned about it?
I said it wasn't easy to understand what concern for the environment means, but clearly it means different things to different people. A lot of these SUV drivers are also writing out checks every quarter to environmental organizations that are committed to helping preserve Forest Park, helping protect salmon habitat, and so on and so forth. So you have to be careful to pick one issue on the platter of environmental issues and say that this is indicative wholly of a person's commitment to the environment. I would also say that this city enjoys a wonderful reputation of also being ahead of a lot of other cities with respect to alternative forms of transportation. I see we're going to be having a question here very shortly, I'm sure, dealing with... but I'll just end it at that.
I would just add, I'm an academic, so I occasionally lapse into that kind of language. And I think we need a gender analysis of SUVs. That is, does driving an SUV mean the same thing to women that it does to men? What does it express? It may be macho for men. It may be self-protection for women. So I think we need to think through that particular dimension. I'll try not to be any more academic after this.
Carl, you make a great soccer mom.
Hello, Diane Lynn, City Club member, and I am past member of the Board of County Commissioners, hopefully future member. And I do think it's important to note there is a special election coming May 15th. But because we want to stimulate a lot more participation in these. So my question is to Adam, because your description of both the lack of understanding of what local government does and the lack of participation with people of younger ages is obviously a terrible concern to us, as you can imagine. My question is, and having worked in the choice movement where we found that only urgency and concern really brought people to the table and really activated people, it seems that perhaps there's a complacency. Maybe things are too smooth. Maybe the problems are managed. And is that what the factor might be? Not that I think we need a crisis to, is there other things beyond crisis and urgency that can engage younger people and get them at the table to start really talking about the issues of the mental health system and other very important issues of the day in this community?
Good question, Diane. And I'd like to go back to something Tad said. I could not agree more that part of this is communications, and part of it is the message, and part of it is the messenger. And where the message is delivered, I think here's where we're missing it. And the old forms of communication are not working with these folks. You've got to make contact with them at places where they're going to be. And I would second your comment, Tad, that I think the place of employment is just becoming more and more critical in identifying where it is that you will have a chance to influence the opinion of those folks. They do have the values. I have been fortunate to be able to do surveys of the general population as opposed to surveys of registered voters. And I can tell you that their hearts are in the right place. I'm wearing my personal hat, perhaps. But the key there is to get them involved, and to get them involved is, I think, more than just crises. It's a question of the message you're using, but also where you're making contact with them. You've got to get to the folks. And where these people are on Sundays or Saturdays, where these people are during the week in terms of their job, these are the places that you've got to be at to reach these folks. Just not members of ethnic groups, but 18 to 34-year-olds as well.
It was interesting when the three of us got together for lunch previous to this luncheon today. We talked a lot about why it wasn't working and why we weren't reaching youth. And it was funny, the next week I came across an article, and I just want to read a small quote that speaks to this directly. It's a quote by Andre Cherney, who was the speechwriter for Clinton and Al Gore, and he was asked the same question, why is there a lack of involvement in young people? And he responded by saying, we have a top-down government that is basically a black hole for energy and a quicksand for idealism. A generation that gets impatient when a web page takes more than a few seconds to appear is not going to waste its time on a government that's not able to produce real solutions to real problems. So I think it's not only the message, it's actually the follow-up and what actually transpires after the message is delivered. I think the young people are looking for immediate change. They're not going to sit around for a long time. They get their pizza and their videotapes delivered to their door in 20 minutes. This is not a public meeting population.
I'd like to be, I think that there's actually, I think we've observed in the last year or two that among what I'll call this kind of generation of, college and post-college generation, there's a lot of passionate activism. It's directed at things like the World Trade Organization, international environmental policy, not at kind of regional planning and urban growth boundaries at the moment. I think that some of us were a bit blindsided by sort of, oh, that's the issue now. Because, of course, I wasn't hanging out with the right, they weren't telling me that in class. Actually, they were if I had read some of the signals correctly. But there is passion. If we're concerned, and not saying people should turn off their concern about issues of world trade and environmental equity in order to think about issues of the Portland region, but to be able to think globally and act locally is an important, there are ways to try to make that linkage, I think.
Ray, I'd like to interject before your question with one from the floor, which is an interesting one. What are the implications and tough choices posed by the energy crisis and environmental clash? How is this likely to shake up Portland's values?
It goes back to the SUV, not from an energy standpoint, but when we're talking about that, the notion that we are in some way fueled by the ability to do what we want in this place, be it, go across the city or get to the mountains or get to the beach. And your comments, Adam, about, you know, one man's ceiling is another man's floor. I think that that is inherent in this place, the ability to get things done, the ability to move through the environment, and I think that is at the root of the energy issue. Is at what point will people not be able to do that, and then what is I mean, that's probably what the question is, but I mean, I think it has to do with how does this place change when so many of the things that we kind of take for granted in our everyday are removed. If someone says you can't turn your lights on at night or you can't operate certain appliances during the day, I wonder how that affects our willingness that this is a great place. I don't think we are energy conscious as much as we are more devoted to our own personal mobility and wants. And so I think that is the head-on collision.
Let me just comment real quickly on that. I mentioned that at the very end of my presentation as a concern that I have, and I am greatly concerned about it because there are two other values when we look at these core values and beliefs that Oregonians have that I see as coming into play here with this looming energy crisis. One is career and job opportunities. And the other is participation in family, is the way we label it and the way we talk about it. And what is in jeopardy are possibly elements of those two values. And if I'm not able to take the kids to the coast when I want to, or take them to the high desert when I want to enjoy the environment at those two places, you can see how all of a sudden people are going to be put into trade-off situations they've never had to deal with here in the Portland area or in Oregon. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think it's something that we all should be on the alert for and watch very carefully. You can start seeing it in the column inches in the papers about the dams. You know, it's tough to be a fish these days all of a sudden, right? And I'm trying very hard to distinguish between what I'm hearing the debate to be among opinion leaders, which tends to be where the newspapers are usually playing, versus what the debate is among the average folks out there in our community. I would still say you're leaning, and strongly so, towards the environmental end of the spectrum. How much longer that may be will be determined here in the next, perhaps, few years.
Ray. Ray Polani, a City Club member. I will not delude you. I have a question, of course, about transportation. Since March of '89, in the state of Oregon, we have registered more vehicles than people. And obviously now, you heard about SUVs and everything else. There's no question we have more vehicles than people, moving more over the place and on and on and on. Gas shortage, gas prices, energy, sustainability. On the other hand, downtown was mentioned, and growth in downtown. Well, in downtown, we are beginning to see what the automobile is doing. The lack of space, competition for space. And we're beginning to put the automobile underground. Yet Max, full of people, practically at the limit, is lumbering through downtown to go from all the way in the east, all the way in the west, and eventually from all the way in the north, all the way in the south, through downtown. At some point, it has to go underground, just like the automobile is going underground, because it has to deliver a lot of people fast, in and out, and through. What about it? When?
Well, I say this sometimes in meetings with a few people. I've never said it with a big group, but I'll get myself in trouble. Light rail is not about transportation. Light rail is about changing land uses and land use patterns. You build the light rail system because it is an instigator for change. It is the infrastructure of new villages that grow up and new neighborhoods that grow up around the light rail stations. I cannot talk anyone out of their SUV, which has leather seats and CD and air conditioning, I can't get them out of that car and make it a more pleasant trip. But what I can do is, as we build light rail systems, we begin to build the infrastructure so that in 15 years, someone can live by a station, they can work by another station, they can drop off their dry cleaning, they can do their shopping, and they become a mobile society, and they think, you know, maybe we only need one car, or maybe we don't need a car at all, but I can't talk you out of it now. But when the infrastructure is in place, then we will begin to have an impact on the transportation. Now, if you underground the rail, you don't get land use changes. You just get people underground in the dark. And there's not the numbers and the ramifications of an above rail system that you have with an underground system. And this is the critical aspect of light rail, is that it's not really about the numbers of people, it's building the future infrastructures of how people live their lives.
I agree, and I don't think that we're going to bury light rail anytime soon, either metaphorically or literally. There's also, of course, the alternative being discussed right now about the other way to get people off of surface streets and move around is in the air rather than underground. So think about that one as another alternative, depending on your neighborhood.
Bob Wheel, member. I've had the good fortune to take several courses from Dr. Abbott at Portland State. Believe me, he's a splendid teacher. If you audit as I do, he's a very easy grader, too. Carl, I do have a question for you. You said to have influence, you've got to be a team player and come to the table. That being the case, how do you account for people like Lloyd Marbett, Bill Sizemore? Whose team are they on, and at whose table are they sitting?
I think Bill Sizemore sits at his own table. And, I mean, my image is a large and inclusive center which still has edges. People on, and I'm not going to label left or right, up and down maybe, whatever, So there are people like Lloyd Marbett who use the initiative process and pushing from the outside because, their positions historically have been sort of beyond that central consensus, Bill Sizemore from the other side. So we clearly have, it's not a table that seats everybody. It's a fairly big table. In order to get there, you have to demonstrate that you have good table manners and that you will be polite when you talk about things. So there certainly are, and there are other people, you look at neighborhoods that feel that they're unrepresented. There are a lot of places, a lot of people and interests that don't feel that they're invited to the table. My worry is what we lose. We gain a great deal in that process. We gain a great deal of consensus building that allows us to move forward. I worry from time to time that we lose some good ideas as well. Now, in the case of Bill Sizemore, that's not a worry, but
the process of engaging citizens in dialogue is really at the heart of what this place is. And unfortunately, I feel like we've reached this point where we don't allow the radical ideas in anymore. I have this vision that in the old days, there'd be a gentleman, a man, smoking a big cigar, who would stroll right past the mayor's secretary and into the mayor and say, Mayor, I've got a great idea, puffing on the cigar, and we ought to build a park here, and furthermore, I'm going to write a check, and we're going to go ahead and do that. And the mayor would say, great idea, and they'd just move it through the system. Now, this visionary can't smoke. They can't even go past the secretary. They have to have an appointment, or worse yet, they have to be appointed to a focus group or a stakeholders meeting. And so there is this really very delicate balance we have of the kind of renegade, harebrained, nutso scheme or visionary idea that tends to get watered down by our process. And I think that is our challenge in our planning process in the future is how do we engage citizens, but also how do we sometimes say, you know, we're not going to engage you in this discussion because we have this idea and we believe in it and it's right, so it doesn't get watered down. Some of those might be good and some not. But there has to be this ability to fuel both of those. I will tell you that the public is getting extremely intelligent. I was witness to a urban planning meeting in Seattle where there were 400 people in a room who did nothing but boo for 2 hours. The city officials were unable to speak at all for 2 hours. And you think, well, that's not in Portland? I was also witness to a planning meeting in Portland a few years ago. It was a very contentious situation where they had the whole room full of neighborhood representatives, and a city council member said, okay, now we're going to break up into focus groups and we're going to come back and with the charts and such. And they all said, we're not breaking up. That's how you break us down. We want you to listen to us as one voice in this room. So we, not only as we need to begin to develop a new way to do the public process, the public is also kind of right on our tails. And I don't have the answer for it, but certainly it's a dilemma about how we keep that balance that lets in those lone voices with good ideas and the lone voices that also represent small sectors of our population, but also know when to say, you know what, we have the better idea this time. So I don't know how you do that dance, but that's where we're heading.
What you need to do is more focus groups. That's the problem, Tad. Let me launch just a very quick passionate defense of the focus group technique here. I think another thing we have to be very careful of is being captured by the 1 on the 1 to 7 point scale and the 7 on the 1 to 7 point scale. We've got to give folks that are on the bell an opportunity to weigh in, to participate in the process. That's getting increasingly difficult to do through the structure, the civic infrastructure that we currently have. And not beating the drum for more research. I'm really not. But one of the techniques that is available is this random sample survey and also random recruiting of focus group participants. And the key also is how you ask people questions. It drives me up a wall, and it drives a respondent up a wall, where when the only thing you give folks is a list of close-ended questions and you ask them to strongly agree, to strongly disagree, darn it, give them a chance to express themselves in their own words. Ask an open-ended question. Yeah, it costs more money. It takes 40 seconds rather than 10 seconds to ask. But ask it. Give them an opportunity to talk, and I'll tell you, Tad, what comes out in those in a careful content analysis of responses to open questions will raise an eyebrow. It's just that we need folks committed to doing that kind of public involvement process.